Welcome to the Resilient Surgeon, part of the STS Surgical Hot Topics podcast. Our goal with the Resilient Surgeon series is to inspire our colleagues to be their best selves in and out of the operating room, using scientifically proven tools and recovery strategies of the world's top performers. I'm Dr. Michael Maddaus, and in each episode, I will talk to game changers who will share evidence-based practices, real-world strategies, and their own personal stories and experiences to help you build your resilience and to help you be your best self no matter what. Our guest today on The Resilient Surgeon is Dr. Ross Bremner. Ross is a cardiothoracic surgeon and the executive director of the Norton Thoracic Institute, and he's also the department chair for the Center for Thoracic Disease and Transplantation at St. Joseph's Hospital and Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Ross was born in South Africa and grew up in a surgical household with his father, Cedric, who was a pioneering general and thoracic surgeon. After leaving South Africa, he spent 1 year doing research in London, England, and then came to the United States for a research position at USC, where he completed his general and thoracic surgical training. Ross then stayed on at University of Southern California as faculty, where he ultimately became the director of the thoracic and lung transplant programs. In 2006, Ross left USC and moved to Phoenix, Arizona to St. Joseph's Medical Center, where he started a thoracic and lung transplant program from scratch, which over time has become one of the busiest and most successful lung transplant programs in the country. In the midst of all this success, Ross flamed out, in his own words, and things got so bad that he was seriously considering leaving his surgical career. Fortunately, he hired an executive coach which dramatically helped him discover the root causes of his burnout and a way to work forward. Since then, he has begun to dedicate his career to study and help alleviate burnout and well-being among his surgical colleagues. In 2021, he completed the Stanford Chief Wellness Officer course, and he has been the Chief Wellness Officer at his hospital since 2020, in addition to chairing the AATS Wellbeing Committee from 2020 to 2024. In 2018, as president of the Western Thoracic Surgical Society, Ross gave his address on his own struggle with burnout and how incorporating what he calls the 3 C's into his life: compassion, connection, and creativity, but particularly compassion, has led to such profound healing for him. My interview with Ross highlights the power of hearing our surgical colleagues' stories and how they have dealt with their own struggles with overwhelming burnout. We are also fortunate to be able to hear Ross's story thanks to his willingness to be vulnerable and human. And now I bring you Ross Bremner. Ross, welcome to the Resilient Surgeon. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here with us today.
Gosh, the honor's all and the privilege is all mine, Michael. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we've known each other for quite a few years, and it dawned on me, for God's sakes, that I should have you on the podcast. I mean, you're not only a gentleman and a scholar and a tremendous surgeon, but you've had some personal challenges, like I think so many people have had in their career. And you took action on those challenges to try and help yourself improve, and now trying to help others improve their lives. And so for today, I'd love to hear your story. What brought you to the world of thoracic surgery, and then your general outlines of your career and the challenges that you've had and what you've done to surmount them. And, on the podcast, we talk a lot about the various strategies and tools and things. And I think the opportunity to talk to you today about your own personal experiences brings a lot of highlight to some of those things. And so that's why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast and talk about these things.
Well, Michael's too kind of you as always. But I think my story is probably pretty similar to a lot of people's story. I mean, I'm a little bit different, perhaps. I'm an immigrant, as you can hear. I grew up in South Africa. My father was a pioneer South African surgeon, and basically when he trained in London and Edinburgh because there was no surgical training in South Africa at the time. My English mother in London, and then they both went back to South Africa, and sort of he forged a career in general surgery, but had a real interest in the esophagus. And at one stage he did a fellowship at the Mayo Clinic just up the road from you.
Wow.
And that was back in 1967, and pictures of me at that time, I'm all bundled up, with mittens and etc. I looked like Kenny from South Park.
That must have been, maybe that was the era of Claggett. I mean, it might be, huh?
Uh,
Wasn't Claggett from the Mayo Clinic?
he actually worked with Henry Ellis at that time.
Okay.
So,
Uh-huh.
and the work that he did actually, he proved that Barrett's esophagus was actually a reflux phenomenon, not a congenital problem as Norman Barrett had proposed. But I think probably subconsciously I ended up here in Phoenix on the surface of the sun, still trying to warm up from those days as a kid in Rochester.
Yeah, no
But my
kidding.
earliest my earliest lifetime memories are actually from Rochester, fishing there, feeding a buffalo.
Wow. Buffalo?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There was a buffalo a buffalo down the road that we would go and take,
Jesus.
carrots and apples to go and feed I was a
What?
5-year-old kid at the time, but so I grew up in South Africa and in a very, very interesting time. It was at the height of apartheid. And my mother being a English born, I was able to get a English passport, and so once I'd finished my basic medical school training, I went and worked in London for a while, trying to decide what I was going to do, and did locums all over England, which was a lot of fun. And in the midst of all that, I actually um, met with my father, who was at a congress, the ESO Esophageal Congress in Paris. And I went and joined him, and he invited me to their final sort of dinner party that they had at the Congress, and I happened to be sitting next to Tom DeMeester.
Hmm.
And one of the great benefits of wine, I think, by the end of the evening, he'd actually offered me a job in Los Angeles, which is where he was moving to from Omaha at the
Right, right, right.
I had actually planned to go and work in New Zealand for a couple of years, having met some Kiwis and getting a job in New Zealand. I was single. I was, trying to sort of spend as much time getting to, know the world. When you grow
Mhm.
up in a country at the bottom of Africa, you do feel a little bit isolated from the rest of the world. And
Mhm.
we all sort of are imbued with this sense of trying to sort of travel. And South Africans actually are very well traveled. I mean, think of my nephews and nieces in South Africa now. I mean, they've been to probably more countries than I have.
Mhm.
But the long and the short of it is I ended up in Tom DeMeester's research lab in Los Angeles. And actually during that time, I realized I was going to be stuck in the lab. California had some pretty strange rules to get your medical license, a little different from the state where Tom DeMeester had come from, being Omaha. And I was stuck with visa issues for a while, and basically ended up spending a couple of years in his research lab, and used that to attain my PhD, because I figured, if I'm doing this stuff, I may as well get something out of it, which is
Mhm.
part of the problem that we have in medicine. I mean, in surgery, right? We're driven to achieve things all the time, but it was a
Well, two things here. That piece I'd love you to elaborate on a little bit.
yeah.
And then I'm also curious about the relationship with your father. And if you don't want to talk about that, that's no problem. But
Yeah.
what was it like being with a surgeon father and his influence on you? Was it more surgical, kind of the surgical personality, or what was the relationship like for you guys?
Yeah. So it's Mike, I'm very happy to talk about it. It's a little raw, and I apologize if if I do get a little emotional, because my pops just passed away 3 months ago, and
No,
I
I know. I
I
know.
was fortunate enough to be able to get back to South Africa and spend the last couple of weeks of his life with him.
That's part of the reason I asked, because I mean, I know what a big event that was for you, and I just wanted to pay homage to it, in any way
Uh,
I could. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I mean, I was very fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with him, and he was my hero. He was, an absolute gentleman. He sort of personified the word grace in my
Mhm.
mind. And
Mhm.
and
Wonderful.
at his passing, my sister, I think, summed it up best. She said, my dad was someone who always made you want to be a better person.
Nice.
Um,
Really nice. Yeah.
and I think that now that he's moved on, I think, we as his children want to sort of try to carry that forward. But He's just a very very wonderful man. But in his youth he was he was a real pioneer surgeon. I mean, and in those days, I mean, he would do a commando head and neck operation in the morning, and then
Mhm.
would do hepatectomy, and then a fem pop bypass. I mean, it was
The way it used to be. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
amazing the
Yeah.
scope.
Yeah.
I do remember him as when I was a kid, the night just before he'd come down to dinner, to join us for dinner, he'd go into his office, or his what he called his study, and he would study, operative techniques for the cases that he was going to do the following
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
something that we've become so focused now with. There's a handful of operations that we do very well, but
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
if I had to go ahead and do a vascular operation now, I would definitely have to open a textbook.
You'd have to go to the study for quite a while. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we didn't see very much of him growing up, because he was a very dedicated surgeon. And we'd see him on Sundays. He'd come back and have lunch with us on a Saturday, and then he'd go right down to his office. He edited the South African Journal of Surgery for about 20 years.
Hmm. So he was a
Um,
major force in South Africa then.
he was completely, as my mom would say. I mean, she realized he was his second wife. She was his second wife, because his
Hmm.
first wife was medicine. And he used to say, look, you residents whine because, but you're not really residents because you go home. He says, when I
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
resident, I was resident in the hospital,
Yeah. 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 The old health
but
studying thing. Yeah.
yeah, but
I just want to say, I mean, his grace appears to have rubbed off or genetically traveled down the line in you, because I would literally describe you as somebody having that kind of demeanor. Yeah. So,
well, Mike, that's just really, really, too kind of you. And I only aspire to be like my dad one day. I mean, he managed to have, 95 years on this earth, and I
yeah.
was with him for 61 years, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah, but I'll tell you how fortunate.
Yeah, no, incredibly fortunate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it's it is tough, and is actually really the first one of my direct family members to to move on. And it's
Hmm.
I'm still working through that. It's
Yeah. Of course.
and
Yeah.
but it's I miss him every day, and it's just amazing how many things remind you of it. And as it is with, I imagine, anybody who's lost a loved one,
Yeah. Yeah.
constantly with you. And you sort of learn to sort of live with your grief rather than sort of get over it, right?
Yeah. I view those things as one of my favorite emotions, believe it or not, is bittersweet. Because the bitterness is mixed with the sweet, and that is the wonderful memories and the fact that you had these experiences and the loss. Without the loss, you wouldn't have that sense of like, wow, I mean, and I used to like that even with patients, the challenges with cancer and the humanity of loss and living and knowing people. I mean, it's a rich environment, and what you're describing with your father is exactly that in my book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not to
I
linger
think
too
I
much
think
on that,
you're
but it's yeah.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's one of the fortunate things that we have as thoracic surgeons is we do deal with patients with bad cancers. And
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think especially my esophagectomy patients. I mean,
Yes.
it's, as it's a tough disease to cure. And those patients that are cured remember you forever, send you
Mhm.
Christmas cards for them.
I know. I
But
know.
you also get to spend a fair bit of time with those patients who develop metastatic disease, and come to end of life issues with them. And I think it's important for us as surgeons to be there with them when that happens.
That,
Um,
that was one of the aspects of the job that I enjoyed the most, frankly, the challenge of that and the humanity of it. I really did. And to use the word enjoy may seem peculiar, but I did. I embraced it. I guess might be the better term.
Yeah, well, it really is. I think it epitomizes the opportunity that we have to really connect with our patients.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
that's probably, and that actually sort of segues. So, get back to your original story. So, I spent some time with Tom DeMeester in his research lab, and then got into the surgical residency at USC. Um, did my surgical residency and then stayed on and did cardiothoracic surgery under the tutelage of Von Starnes. And then actually stayed on as faculty for 5 years at USC after that. And I was super fortunate to have, two giants, in
Hmm.
cardiac and thoracic um, specialties to sort of, to mentor me. And, I still take a lot from those years. And, I was actually just back at USC, invited back to talk last week, and it was just great to see Vaughn and, some of the old colleagues. Um, but I then came out here to Phoenix back in the beginning of 2006. And it was kind of a really rare opportunity because there was no lung transplant program on the ground here. The hospital had received a certain amount, a big chunk of change to start what was then called a Heart Lung Institute. And, I came out to give a talk, and then, they sort of offered me, all these sorts of things that I really wanted to start a program. And they basically said, why don't you come out here and start a lung transplant program? And at that time, I'd actually, I'd had an opportunity to fly out to Phoenix to procure some organs. And the person that I had sewed them in Los Angeles was actually also a Phoenician. So it was clear to me that there was really a sort of a regional area of need. At that time, Phoenix was supposed to be the fifth largest city in the country, and there was no transplant program.
I didn't know that. I didn't know Phoenix was that large. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was very little general thoracic surgery as well. I mean, it was mostly done by cardiac surgeons, and the sort of the medical infrastructure in Phoenix was a little bit like the Wild West. I mean, that's what
Hmm.
you can still refer to it, as today. But I realized it was a great opportunity, and so I came out here to basically start a thoracic and lung transplant program, from scratch, and was fortunate to be able to recruit, some phenomenal, partners. And, we were fortunate enough to be able to be given the green light to start a lung transplant program because we were the only, and I think still to this day, the only standalone lung transplant program in the country. So we had no other transplant programs. We started with lung transplant, no kidney, liver. We since have,
And you mean no kidney, no none of that stuff?
none of that. Yeah.
That's unusual, boy. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I imagine it was pretty contentious that, with the powers that be at UNOS, et cetera, is whether or not we should, be given a shot. But it was, it was pretty interesting when we came out here because our CFO at the time said, look, I'm going to give you all the money to start this program. And we said to him, listen, you have to pay for these first transplants for free. You have to,
Yeah.
no one's going to cover these as, and he said, no problem, we've got the cash, we're going to do that, et cetera. And then, of course, the CFO changed. And by that time, I had recruited all these guys to join me on the ground here. And the new CFO said, no, we're not paying for these transplants.
Oh, okay.
And, it was, I lost a little sleep there, I'll tell you,
I can imagine. Yeah.
But we actually managed to get LOAs, for each of the first 10 transplants. I think for the first 12 or 13 transplants, we actually managed to get, the insurers to cover those transplants because otherwise patients would have had to leave the state. There was a small program down in Tucson, but here we were, a city of 5 million people with no transplant program. So sort of fast forward, 15 years later, and suddenly we realized that we were actually one of the largest transplant programs in the country. In fact, in 2018, I think we were the largest program with 119 transplants at that time.
Hmm.
And we're still maintaining a very, very high quality, which was fantastic. But, about that time, another local, the program down in Tucson went on hiatus for a bit, and we actually, we sort of absorbed all of their patients, and we'd always been lagging behind sort of the amount of people power that we needed to sort of run the program, and we were pretty much running on empty. And sort of about 2017, 2018, I mean, I was really working, harder than I ever had, just not only physically drained, but emotionally drained. And then my younger brother, at the age of 50, who was also one of my heroes and one of these, big endurance athletes that does these, major multi-day canoe, hike, run,
Mhm.
bike marathon type things. He called me around the time of Christmas and told me that he'd just been diagnosed with anaplastic large cell lymphoma, which is a pretty devastating disease. It's mostly in kids, and it's actually where the ALK gene is originally. We use that in lung cancer now, but he was ALK negative, which gave him about a 40% 5-year survival with chemo and a bone marrow transplant.
Mhm.
So, we were sort of really, I think that was probably sort of the final straw on top of everything else I was dealing with. I mean, about that time, our our C-suite and our administrators at the hospital all changed, and they all wanted to do something different with our institute. And it was put in sort of an inordinate amount of strain on me from a political sense. I mean, I had to sort of go and present ourselves constantly to sort of preserve what we had developed, and I knew that we had something pretty unusual. I mean, here we were an inner city hospital with academic associations, but we were not a university center at the time.
Mhm.
And I just really wanted to preserve everything that we had developed, and we had an incredible group of people that were doing unbelievable work, and it was my responsibility to keep all of that together. And then one day, I mean, I just found myself completely depleted. I mean, I think that's the word that really sort of encompasses how I felt. I mean, for the first time, I really, I wake up in the morning and I just did not want to come to work.
Mhm.
And I'd realized that, I was suffering from this stuff that people were calling burnout. I mean, as I started reading about it, I was reading, that I was literally sort of emotionally, exhausted. I was cynical about things. I was depersonalized. I had this sort of decreased sense of any accomplishment. And it really struck me one day. I was walking down the hallway in the hospital, and this is all pre-COVID, of course, and the patients that you'd see in the hospital wearing masks were likely our lung transplant patients.
Mhm.
And this patient walking down the hall with a mask, waved me down and said, "Dr. Bremner, is that you?" And I said, "Yeah, it's me." And she said, "You did my lung transplant 4 years ago, and I'm doing fantastic. And I just want to thank you. Can I give you a hug?" And I gave her sort of the obligatory hug. And, I said what we always say is, well, it's just what we do. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're doing well. And off I walked. And I remember being, really conscious of the fact that there was no exchange of emotion
It was it was
from me to there.
a
There was
little dismissive even.
completely dismissive. I did not
Yeah.
accept any gratitude from her.
Right.
It
Right.
was a very deep personalized interaction.
Yeah.
And make a long story short, I talked to the CEO of the hospital at the time, who had become a personal friend of mine, and I just told him, "Look, I think I'm in trouble. I'm actually thinking for the first time in my life of leaving medicine, and I'm completely stuck because I have this responsibility for this institute, for the things that we've developed here for our patients, but I have, I was anhedonic is the, term I
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
try to watch a movie with my kids and I would get no enjoyment out of it.
Can I ask, and you don't have to answer this, of course, but I'm curious about home during these times. And what's your wife's name?
So my wife is Kathy.
Kathy, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
And
and
I've got two kids, Kenzie and Ashley.
hmm
And actually, everything was pretty copacetic at home.
hmm hmm
We had struggled in Los Angeles, quite frankly, and just having a conversation with my wife last weekend, in fact, I mean, Los Angeles was, I was running around between a lot of different hospitals. I worked at 5 different hospitals, so I would leave at 5 in the morning. I'd get home at, usually 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we had 2 young kids, and I basically only try to connect with them on the weekends, which is,
Yeah. Yeah.
and when we moved out here and things slowed down for a little bit, we kind of realized that we had been in trouble as a couple, because we weren't connecting. And
Yeah.
but about this time of sort of when I was burned out, I mean, I think home was okay, but
Mhm.
it was we my kids were sort of just finishing high school, and they were doing great high school. They're both synchronized swimmers. So everything was pretty healthy, but I would say that my relationship with my wife we were not connecting on the level that we usually like to connect.
Yes.
And
Yes.
mostly because I think I was absent. I was
Yeah.
not present when I was home.
Even
And
when you were home, I want to just be clear about that. Yeah, not present when you were home. Yeah.
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 So it's not like we had any sort of major conflict, but I probably was just sort of part of the furniture at home. Um,
I've been there. I
and
know what that's like.
and
Yeah.
and fortunately, my wife had given up her career at that stage just to help raise the kids, and she's back at school now, developing a second career. We might talk
Mhm.
about that in a minute, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's and my wife had recognized that I was in trouble too, and at that time she had suggested I go and see a therapist, and she had suggested a therapist that she had that worked with to help her through the loss of her father. And I went to this therapist late in the latest Friday sort of you know appointment
I
that
can
she
totally
had.
picture it. Yeah.
And I snuck out there. I mean, literally, when I got out of my car, I looked around to
Oh
make.
God, I know.
And I
Like
honestly,
pray nobody sees me. Yeah, going in.
I paid cash because I didn't
Yeah.
even put it on my
Oh,
credit.
I've done it. I've
Yeah.
done it. I've done the very same thing. Yeah.
And I was just,
We laugh, but I'll tell you that's such an issue.
uh,
It's just such an issue. Yeah.
and I was desperate for help. I really was. And
Yeah.
that was not a good match for me. The person that, I was speaking to is not, I didn't feel like there was any sort of connection, and I didn't want to go back.
Right.
But my COO suggested that I talk to his coach, and he had an executive coach, and that was the same coach that had worked with our previous CEO. And she calls herself a reformed attorney or something. I mean, she used to be a highbrow attorney, and now she's moved into the coaching world, and she really was phenomenal. And it just was it probably took me more than a year to be able to just sort of stop and sort of recognize where I was and to sort of be present in my world. Of course, all this time I'm trying to deal with my brother, right? And he's in South Africa, 10,000 miles away, and I mean, that story in itself is there's divine intervention there, however you look at it, because it turns out that the oncologist that he went to go and see was a classmate of mine.
Hmm.
And when my brother walked into his office the first time, um, David Britton is the oncologist. He wasn't in the office, and my brother was sort of walking around looking at things on the wall, and there was a graduation picture. And here's a graduation picture of 200 medical students, and everybody's just lined up randomly. And it turns out that David Britton is standing right next to me.
My gosh. Yeah. Incredible.
So Bruce meets with David, and David's a phenomenal guy, and they sort of decided that they hate this beast, anaplastic large cell lymphoma, and what they're planning on doing was full dose chemotherapy followed by a bone marrow or stem cell transplant. And in South Africa, the way they induce you for stem cell transplant, they give you whole body radiation because it's the cheapest way to do it, right? And I think they do it in many places in Europe. Here, we actually induce you with high dose chemotherapy. But we all know what whole body radiation does to you, and he's 50, and I'm thinking of his eyes, his thyroid, his pulmonary fibrosis. I mean, all of that. And he actually had survived a bad melanoma many years before. He actually had this, most of his nose removed and, full thickness skin grafts put on his nose. And that's actually, unfortunately, how my dad finally passed, was from metastatic melanoma.
Really.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
So this is one of the great things about being in medicine, right? You can call around and you can get contact. And so
Yes.
if you're in the world, and I called Doug Wood, who put me in touch with his folk. I called some people at the City of Hope, MD Anderson Memorial, all of these, because it's an unusual cancer in adults. And I came across this person at the City of Hope. Jasmine Zane was her name, and I mean, she just showed me such compassion. She understood. She called me personally after I'd sent out an email, and she said, "Look, I've just read this paper, that came out of Mayo Clinic on a sort of a new treatment paradigm for this anaplastic large cell lymphoma. You need to get hold of these guys, up at the Mayo Clinic. And Steve Ansel was the head of the oncology program up at Mayo. And I managed to get hold of him. And turns out I said, you seem to have a similar accent to mine. It turns out he's trained in my same medical school in South Africa.
God damn, the world is small, but it's so big.
Yeah, it's incredible,
Unbelievable.
right?
And
And
back to Mayo Clinic now, too. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There you go, back to Minnesota, right?
yeah, yeah.
So he says, look, we've just done this multi-center trial and we've done some gene rearrangement studies. I need you to send me some of his slides from his tumor, and I can tell you, what his prognosis is and what things are going to look like in the future with different types of treatments. And essentially, there were two gene rearrangements. One was called DUSP22 and the other was called TP63. And the TP63 guys, no matter what treatment you gave them, almost everybody was dead in 48 months.
I see. So huge prognostic indicator. Yeah.
Right. And the DUSP22 patients actually did better than the ALK positive kids. I mean, they had about an 80% 5-year survival without even a bone marrow transplant.
Hmm.
So I send him all these slides from South Africa, and now I'm sitting waiting, right? We're just waiting. And he calls
And
me.
this is all in the milieu of everything going out at work and everything else.
Everything going on.
Yeah.
And yeah. So it's sort of a very sort of stressful time of my life for sure. And he actually calls me. I'm in the middle of a esophagectomy, really, and I get a call from Steve, and so I go, whoa. I said, let me call him back, And as soon as this whole time I was thinking to myself, Michael, if my brother's TP63, what do I do? Do I tell him that, it doesn't matter whether you get chemo or bone marrow transplant, your chances of survival are zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is an awful feeling,
Yeah.
And but he tells me, well, guess what? Your brother's TP, his DUSP22 positive, which means that he only needs chemo. He does not need a bone marrow transplant. And so,
Huge.
I mean, this huge weight is lifted off my
Yeah.
shoulders.
Yeah.
But of course, I've got to convince my South African, compadres that he doesn't need a bone marrow transplant, because
Yeah.
that's
That's a big shift. Big
yeah.
shift. Yeah.
So, I don't want to get too involved, right? I mean, I don't want, I'm not an oncologist. I don't never heard of anaplastic large cell lymphoma until my brother got it, right?
Mhm.
And so I called David Britton. I said, Dave, listen, do me a favor, just call Steve Ansel at Mayo Clinic. He said he'd take your call. Just discuss Bruce and just the need for bone marrow transplant, because he was still, really bent on doing the bone marrow transplant. And he
Had
just
he had radiation at this point?
No, he hadn't. He was
Okay.
just getting chemo. He was getting chemo, and he was being beaten up, man. I mean, he lost 35 pounds of, with weight that he didn't have to give up, It's just
Yeah.
and he never got hold of him, and I kept going, well, should I get Steve to call you, or and eventually David ended up at an oncology conference somewhere in South America. I want to say Argentina. And there he is, at the banquet dinner, at the end of this conference, and he's sitting next to Steve Ansel.
God damn.
They discuss Bruce. Okay.
This is the level of fortuities in this story is beyond comprehension. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, really.
yeah, divine intervention. I'm pretty sure, and so ends up Bruce does not get the bone marrow transplant. He gets through the chemo, and a couple of years later, he's was free. He climbed to base camp, with all
Nice.
his
Nice.
buddies, and is back to doing all of these
Things he loves.
day things, and
Yeah.
so I was super grateful of that. But that was sort of, I think, the final straw for me. I mean, I was tapped out emotionally and physically from work, and I mean, and then of course I had this sort of personal thing that happened.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine losing my brother,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I just felt pretty hopeless being 10,000 miles away. And I'll tell you, getting back to South Africa is not easy.
No.
Can't go and spend a long weekend there,
Mhm.
It's,
Mhm.
you've got about, 24 hours of flying,
Yeah.
So it's but you know, but to get back to my coach, Rosemary is her first name, and she was just incredible, and she really worked with me over, a period of a couple of years and sort of helped me realize, the things that really matter to me and the things that can help sort of fill my bucket. And so what I did is I actually sort of I chronicled my journey of this sort of burnout and out of burnout at my presidential address at the Western Thoracic Surgical Association, which was sort of about a year after I'd started the coaching, and I'd recognized there were three things that are sort of important to me, and part of my title of the talk was sort of help from the three C's, and those three C's sort of I called creativity, connection or connectedness, and compassion. And sort of the creativity piece was, just try to remember some of the things that you actually enjoy doing, whether you paint or ride your mountain bike or you play your guitar, or, just take a little time out to try to do those from time to time. But the connectedness, I think, was really critical. I mean, when I go away now and I come back to work, I mean, the thing that fills my bucket is my colleagues and the guys I work with. I mean, I have just the most incredible operating room staff. I mean, it is just fun to work with these people, and they just up our game, So that connection at work, and of course, making a good connection with your friends and with your family is critical. And I mean, it's all summed up in the Good Life, the study that chronicles that
Harvard Dean study.
85-year-old, if you want to be healthy and happy, have good quality relationships, But I realized also that that the thing that really filled my bucket was this sort of compassion piece, and I'd realized that I was sort of missing out on the opportunity to really connect with my patients because I was just taking it on a very superficial level, and a patient wanted to thank me, I would go, yeah, that's what we do. And believe it or not, about that time, I called David Britton and I said, David, look, I have to just tell you how grateful me and my whole family is for what you did for Bruce. And, there's no words that can describe it, but you just need to know that, we are eternally grateful for your expertise and what you were able to do. And literally, he said to me, you don't have to thank me. It's what we do. I mean, those same words.
Yeah.
But something really struck me, Michael, is that he was not accepting my gratitude, which actually shortchanged me.
It does. That's right.
And so I realized that when my patients say to me, Dr. Bremner, can I give you a hug? And I blow it off and I give them a cursory hug. We're missing out on a really important opportunity to connect with our patient and allow them to give us gratitude.
Yes.
I mean, it's
Cannot agree more strongly. You're denying them the gift of giving you the gift and the experience of giving you the gift, minimizing it. Marshall Goldberg, I might be mistaking his name, wrote a book that's incredible called Nonviolent Communication. And he talks extensively about that, gratitude and receiving good things from people, thank yous and appreciation, and how not heeding that and really embracing it leaves the individual feeling empty afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so as I've been sort of thinking about this and working out in my own life, how do I sort of make the most of this human connection with your patients? And I realized that we sometimes think that we just don't have time for compassion, right? It takes extra time. You've got to actually find out your patient's story. You've got to talk to them as people, and you have to be vulnerable yourself. You have to open yourself to
Yes.
the emotions of that connection. And it's very well summed up in the book Compassionomics, which I highly recommend everybody read. They talk about how little time it actually really takes to make that connection with your patients. And I try to sort of teach this to my medical students and my residents that are with us. Is I'll ask them to go and do an H&P on a patient in the clinic, and they'll come back and they'll give me the H&P, and the example I use is a real life example where I had a resident say, this lady's a 48-year-old lady. She's got a left upper lobe non-small cell lung cancer. It's been biopsied. It's TTF positive. The PET doesn't show any mediastinal nodes. I think she would be good for mediastinal staging and a right upper lobectomy. And I go, wow, that's great. That comes from a surgical resident. Someone's been teaching something. But I said to him, what does this patient do? What else do you know about this patient? And most of the time they don't know, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we go in together and we go and see this patient. And I say, so tell me about yourself. I mean, what do you do? So it turns out she's a baker at a local grocery store. And she just lost her husband 2 years previously from lung cancer. And she's a single mom with young kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said to, surgical resident, doesn't that change everything? Doesn't that change how you see this person rather than seeing this just as a disease? So you're now dealing with a baker who has a horrible experience with lung cancer and young kids who you may be able to help with a right upper lobectomy. I mean, it changes the whole scene, I think, around our patients. And I think we just, it needs to come back into our training that we see people as, see our patients as people, rather than their diseases. And I know that people have been talking about this forever. My dad talked about it a lot, when he taught us as medical students, but you kind of tend to sort of lose it. You forget because we're rushed. We feel we don't have that time, and we've just got so much that we've got to get done in a day. I just recently read a book by Stephanie Brown, I think her name is. She's an addiction specialist, but she's written a book on our addiction to speed. I think the book's called Speed.
Busyness and speed and moving.
Right. And then she spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and her patients with these people that were working ungodly hours developing computer programs and startups and this sort of stuff, where there was incredible amounts of money to be made if you could just take get the upper edge on your your colleagues, etc. But I think it's happened to us in medicine too, and it was when I reflect, it was part of the problem I had with burnout, is that I just was trying to just accomplish too much, and so you essentially ultimately feel that you're never enough, right? You're not enough at home, you're not enough at work. Am I being the best leader that I can? And there's too much for us to do, and we never stop. We don't prioritize, which is something you've talked about, and we become less mindful with the things that we're doing. And so, I think if we, as I go forward, I'm trying to be more mindful in my relationships with my patients.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's mutually beneficial. I mean, I get a big kick out of it. Fills my bucket. I mean, there's science now that shows that, when you connect with your patients, it's kind of like the same as the dopamine hit you get from a funny TikTok or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the compassion centers are your reward centers in your brain, as opposed to the empathy centers, which are like
very different structure, very different set of physiologic responses.
Yeah. So sort of that's where I feel that I'm back to a place where I am so grateful for being able to do what I'm doing and practice my art and to help the patients that I'm able to help. And I'm hoping that, for the rest of my career, I can imbue some of that on my residents and because the residents they still have a miserable time in their training. I mean, they're chronically fatigued. I mean, I interviewed a fellow this morning who might want to come and join us, or at least come and look at our program. And I asked him, what fun do you have? And he goes, well, quite frankly, I don't have time for fun.
Yeah.
He says, when I have a bit of time, I'm just trying to take a nap.
Yeah.
And it's not sustainable.
The thing is, it becomes a pattern that persists, and it just keeps going, even afterwards. You go to the next stage, and you mentioned achievement. Okay, so you finish residency, and then you go into, and now you got to be a staff, and you got to worry about all that and developing a career, and if you're in academics, or proving yourself in the operating room, and then with the onslaught, as you so aptly characterize it, of everything coming at you, 300 emails a day. how many meetings, and crap that we do, that most of which is frankly unnecessary.
No, there's so
A
much
lot of
noise.
so
I,
much noise.
I refer to it
There's
as
a signal in it,
just,
and that's where you've just got to really be like a surgeon and cut that stuff out so you can focus on what matters to you.
gosh, I love that metaphor.
But it's true. And when
Yeah,
I work with people, I mean, this is one of the first things, take an inventory of all the crap you're doing and
yeah,
start excising this stuff, and get back to what matters to you and what, as you said, fills your bucket.
yeah.
It's very difficult to do because it's always fear of missing out. You worry about everything, there's so many pressures, that one feels inside, but it's a crucial thing. I mean, do you agree with that? Or I mean,
Yeah, look, I completely agree with it, and we always feel obliged to say yes when people ask us to do things, and
part
you
of the
had
training. That's one of the habits of surgical training. Say yes to everything.
and
Yeah,
in your coaching and in the coaching I've had too is whenever you say yes to something, you ought to be saying, looking back and saying, well, what am I going to say no to if I'm going to take this on, right?
that's right. Something's got to give. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this achievement thing was, and look, I was like most people, want to impress their parents, and
Mhm.
my dad always was pushing me, as was my mom. That in
Mhm.
fact, I'm one of four kids, we all sort of lamented how much we had our butts kicked as kids to sort of do better and more,
Mhm.
and fortunately, we've all turned out to be relatively successful and relatively stable people, but
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I still remember, when we hit, what it was, 500 transplants, and I called my dad. I said, "We've done 500 transplants," and his response was, "Yes, but are you publishing?"
Yes.
And he
You
and he
know,
meant he meant he
but
meant no ill by it, but he just wanted to make sure that I was not, not missing out on other things of the academic world, and it's his worldview, right? The interesting thing was, towards the end of his life, I mean, he started asking me things like, are you taking time for your hobbies?
Mhm.
Are you drawing and painting again, which is something that
Mhm.
I, always wanted to do, always enjoyed doing. So it's funny, as he matured, he recognized the importance of those. My dad retired at the age of 77.
Mhm.
After forced retirement in South Africa, which was a 65, he came out and worked for another nearly 13 years at USC, ran the research lab, and then ran a surgical unit at the county hospital.
Yeah.
In the workhorse, man.
Workhorse. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I think
that,
this desire for achievement, and there's we do have this fear of missing out, and we just we constantly want to do more and have more in our CV.
Mhm.
And someone introduced me to the term that instead of FOMO, you should be looking for JOMO, which is the joy of missing out.
Yes. No kidding. I love that, Jomo. Yeah.
JOMO.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but and you've talked about it, and you talked about it when you talked at our conference here, is slowing down and saying no to certain things and learning how to prioritize your life. Because the reality is, I'm not going to be sitting on my deathbed going, I wish I did another lung transplant.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm gonna regret, the swim meet or the guitar concert from my kids, and
Yeah.
um, not that I missed out on too many of those. I mean, I really tried to do my best, but at the same time, I really could have been a lot more present for my kids when they were growing up, you know.
Let's just talk about that a little bit and it gets at the connection piece. And you've alluded to that with the patients. And of course, that's wonderful. And it's a massive addition to one's well-being, I believe, because you feel good when you connect with people. It
Sure.
really feels good. And that feel good, there's something going on inside, and the physiology is very real. And I have a strong belief that with everything being so busy and FOMO and everything that you've talked about, that there's a tremendous lack of connection, both with our colleagues often. Now, you are fortunate, you've got a group of colleagues you've worked with for years, but they're often now with the turnover of personnel, and the shifting of things and all this stuff, the thing is so unsteady, and people that you once were there for you are no longer there necessarily. But in addition, it's also part of this is my belief that the culture of surgery to some extent fosters disconnection. We have to be tough, we have to be strong. We can't admit our vulnerability to people. And now, no lunchroom. We don't get lunch. We used to have a lunchroom where we'd go and talk to people. And that went away. It still exists in some places, but we don't have those moments of time where you spend some time actually talking to a person. And as you said with the patients, it doesn't take that much. It just takes a coffee, for God's sakes, and actually being curious about somebody. And I'm contending that the same thing is true with our families. And I remember I was the archetypal individual that showed up at the things whenever I could, right? That was really the extent of my deep connection with my kids. And I was like your father. What's next on the agenda? Where are we going with this? What's the next protocol? What's the next achievement? And when I kind of basically had my ass handed to me and I woke up, that shifted. And suddenly now it was not, I'm going to show up for the swim meet. I'm going to just come in your room and hang out and chat a little bit. And it deepened my relationships profoundly. And I went in without expectations of what was going to come from the conversation. I didn't go in there with a goddamn agenda. And these things, it doesn't take that much time, but this connection piece everywhere you go, I call it everyday leadership. Connection is the name of the game for our mental and physical health. It's such a pivotal piece. Any thoughts around any of the stuff that I just said there?
Yeah, we're on the same page, Mike. I mean, and quite frankly, my relationship with my kids and my wife now is as good as it's ever been.
Yes.
I've got a daughter who's doing a doctorate in occupational therapy up in Oregon. I'm so proud. I mean, she's had a lot of struggles, and she's managed to come out on top, and she's going to give back in ways that really fill her bucket, and I'm super proud. And then my younger daughter is going to be a lawyer, but she's taken a year between undergrad and law school to go and do a master's in Spain. She's doing a bilingual education master's in Spain, so she can be completely bilingual when she gets back here.
Lovely.
But it is just, I mean, I just have such, when I have conversations with them now, it is just
It's a whole different
great, so
ball
great.
of wax, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's and you're exactly right. There's no agenda to a lot of this stuff. You start up with what's going on in your life, and my youngest and I, we tend to have these sort of bantering arguments about things, and we both love it to bits.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we do it at home, my wife usually leaves because she thinks it gets a little uncomfortable.
But that's fun. I mean, I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
But it is wonderful, and my wife now has gone back to school too, and she's doing a master's in counseling, and she feels super excited by having a second career, and she wants to give back in the counseling world. And she's working now doing a quote internship in an inner city school with mid-schoolers that are super troubled kids. And I think it's super exciting watching her grow into a new chapter of her life. And the two of us, I just as we talked about recently, is I've just finished doing a coaching course because I've gotten so much out of being coached that I would like to help others down the line.
Yeah.
But this whole couples issue and the struggles that we have in cardiothoracic surgery. I mean, we brought this to light in the wellness committee for the AATS in the spouse survey that we did a couple of years ago.
Right.
We're falling short, man. We're sacrificing way too much on things that really matter, like our most important relationships. I mean, our spouses are not happy, and they actually think we're more burned out than we do, believe it or not.
And they're probably correct.
No, I think you're right. And
they see things that we don't see. As Aeneas Nin says, we don't see the world as it really is. We see it as we are,
Yeah. So we see that that's an area that we might want to sort of give back as well, is just help couples in cardiothoracic surgery. And she will be a counselor, I'll be a coach, and we'll find out, who needs
Wonderful.
what and try to
Fantastic, man.
really,
Such a needed area. Such a needed area. Yeah.
well, like you alluded to earlier, I mean, we're never allowed to admit our weaknesses, right?
Yeah.
And and it affects us, and we end up making some we have some bad problems in our world, I mean, the suicide rates just speak to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And I even would change the word weaknesses because that's part of the problem.
we call it weak.
We
Yeah.
call it weaknesses, and we don't allow ourselves to speak about our humanity.
Yeah.
And the world of surgery, it's I I don't like to shave in the shower with a straight blade. All right. But I've done it for years, you know, and I don't use foam. I've maybe put a little soap on my face, but the razors, 4 or 5 uses, I got to get another razor and I got to keep going over it and it's scratching. And by the fourth shave, it's, the rough on my face. I've always hated it. So I went and bought this Braun electric razor, right? And I'm like, this is going to solve the problem. I mean, it was a big deal. I spent $300 on this shaver, right? So I get this shaver and, here it is.
Does it make coffee?
No, it doesn't make coffee, but here it is. I've got it on my desk because it's too big to plug into the bathroom. And I start shaving and I notice that under here, it doesn't get it right as close as I would like to the few whiskers. And being 70 years old, I don't want to have whiskers that are unshaved on my face because it's not good. When you're 70, it looks like you're kind of a Gomer, right? I'm not happy with that. So one day I am in the shower and I had shaved with my electric razor and I took the razor blade and I just like that. It was very smooth, easy, and it trimmed up all the little loose ones that I missed. And I've been using that blade now probably 30 shots and it's still smooth as silk. It takes me just 1 minute. And the point here is that I believe the metaphor is that we tend to think of things in binary terms. You got to be strong, you got to be disciplined, you got to be self-sufficient, you got to have this ability to fix things. And that's the surgeon's world. This is what is bred into us. And like all things, it's good until it's not. And we ignore our humanity side. We keep stuffing it. And my point is, we need both. It needs to be an and. It needs to be the two together, and the two together make for a much better shave, and a much better human being and a much better physician. Maybe that was a little long-winded metaphor, but I've at least at the moment thought it was apropos.
Well, I'm not going to spend $300 on an electric razor, but well, but your point is really well taken. I mean, one of the hardest things that I did was give that presidential address because I really had to expose my own
Yes.
vulnerability, and my own sort of humanity, as you put it. But I did realize that it's everyone's experience.
Everyone.
It's just
Almost everybody.
we just don't want to talk about it.
We don't want to
And
talk
I
about
did give that address. I mean, burnout was we were only just starting to talk about it. Now at least we're having conversations, and we are starting to do some things about it. I think, I mean, I think institutions are starting to be aware of things that need to be done, and we are learning what we can do for ourselves. And I'll tell you, I learn a lot from some of my med student mentees. I mean, they've got a much healthier approach to life than I did when I was their age.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
But I think you're exactly right. I mean, where there is incredible power and vulnerability, and if you don't believe me, just go and read Brené Brown. I mean,
there's a million sources. Yeah.
Yeah.
The combination of the two, that discipline, that all the stuff that makes us great as surgeons, you got to know when to let it go and then become the human being. They need to be integrated, fully. Yeah.
When I talk to our med students, I ask them, if you're gonna have a cabbage, do you want to have an expert surgeon or you just want to have a compassionate surgeon, And almost everyone goes, I want an expert surgeon, because it's a operation that you need to have, it's my heart, for goodness sake. And then I ask them, what would it be like to have an expert surgeon who actually also cares about you?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's really where we want to go, because we're all going to need healthcare, at some stage. And as we get older, we know that we access the healthcare system more frequently. And it's very obvious to me when I meet with physicians for myself, who actually cares about me and who doesn't.
Oh, it's so obvious. Yeah. I just had an experience with an endodontist. I had a root canal 10 years ago, and it was way, like 20 miles north of Minneapolis. And it was a referral. I loved him. He was a great guy, cared about me. We talked, got a personal relationship going. And so there's something wrong with the tooth. Just the other day, and I saw an endodontist closer with the new dentist that referred me to this person. I went in, it was a very technical experience. I'm sure the guy is, he's well known. He lives in Edina, this rich area. I mean, the office is, but I got out of there and I called my guy up there and drove up, had my consult, and he's going to do the work for me, I mean, and it was because of the relationship and he cared about me, but he's also technically a master.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've done a very good job in our cardiothoracic world of producing, technically competent, if not technically expert surgeons.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I think we've missed out an opportunity in sort of, in making everybody care a little bit more. I mean, just like you said, it's the humanity aspect of it. And quite frankly, I think that it's a antidote to burnout if we can really connect with our patients and connect with our colleagues. It'll give us a whole lot more meaning in our lives and give us, purpose. We'll be better doctors. We'd make less mistakes. We'd be more productive, and we'd be able to come home and be a little more present.
It is the antidote. It is one of the major antidotes. I mean, there are many. You got to cut back on the crap you're doing. You got to give yourself time and space, et cetera. But you also need that level of connection everywhere you go. And that is a magical sauce when you do all those things.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Well, Michael, you've been such a leader in this world, and I personally just want to thank you for being such an inspiration to so many of us. And just you I think I referred to you as the phoenix before. I mean, you really reinvented yourself, and it is I see you as a completely different person as I saw running on the treadmill at the STS maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I am. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. It was a very hard road, and I remember after I got out of Hazelden for the prescription narcotic addiction, and I just thought my life was over, in any way that I knew it. My identity was gone, and didn't think I've had any role in the future with my colleagues, which I really miss dearly. And I love surgeons, truly love them. And through a series of, fortuities and various things that happened, it all slowly came together. And, honestly, it took a lot of courage for me to do some of these things, stepping back into the arena on this stuff. But, I believed it, and I knew that things were changing in my life. Many of the very practices that you've talked about that I started adopting and had experiences that proved the value of these things. And so, it all led to the paper, the Resilience Bank account, and then, kind of one thing led to another. And I do appreciate what you said, Ross, because it was so difficult. It was so difficult to come from, addiction treatment, to now being a person that has something to offer, I hope, to my colleagues, is really a
Maybe
challenge.
maybe one of the hardest things you've done, and you've done some hard things.
Yeah, no, I would think it is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, and my youth was extraordinarily difficult, but this was a rough one. But, my God, I am so grateful that I have anything to do with my surgical world and the people, the great people in it. And, to be able to sit here and talk to you about these things, my God, I mean, it's as good as it gets for me, literally.
Well, it's a real privilege, and I know that you're not just this podcast, but all the coaching that you're doing and the talks that you are doing are reaching a lot of people, and so I'm grateful for that, because
Yeah.
it comes back at me. People tell me, oh, I heard Mike Maddaus give this talk, and I go, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right.
it's really helping change the culture, right? I mean, that's really all we can do, is just
That's
try
right.
try to move the
Right.
needle a little bit.
A little bit at a time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we've got a lot of crises coming our way, man. We got a real shortage of cardiothoracic surgeons in
Mhm.
the next decade.
Yeah. A lot of stuff going on.
Yeah,
The uncertainty and what I would call almost chaos of modern medicine is rampant.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
Ross, this has been wonderful.
Oh, Michael, thank
Truly.
you. Real privilege. And
Yeah.
you've had some, just unbelievable guys on your podcast. So maybe when I do
And
publish.
one of them's right here. One of them's right here today.
This has been The Resilient Surgeon, a podcast brought to you by the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please rate it 5 stars and let your friends, trainees, and colleagues know about it. On social media, you can use the hashtag #BeYourBestSelf. More information about the Society of Thoracic Surgeons is available online at sts.org.